Hello everyone. So I wanted to do a video covering what had happened at the DNC, their misguided strategy as it were, and how I think it's not going to really be helpful in terms of getting younger voters out there. So there's a lot of problems with the DNC and how that unfolded. But before I get to that, I want to address what had happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin recently. We first had the shooting of Jacob Blake, and I'm sure all of you have seen the video at this point. I don't probably have to go over the facts of the incident, but he was shot in the back 7 times. He's still alive, from what I understand. He's probably going to be paralyzed for the rest of his life. And so this shooting triggered a lot of riots and unrest and protests in Wisconsin. And I mean, look, people kind of conflate these two things, and they make it look like all of the protesters are violent, which is not true. You have to be very careful about how you talk about these things. And also, by the way, I mean, I would add the caveat. It's like even though I'm not in favor of violence or property damage, it's easy to understand, or at least contextualize, historicize where these reactions come from and why people feel like it actually is productive. If you look at the reaction to Martin Luther King Jr. being assassinated, and then we passed the civil rights, the continuation of the Civil Rights Act shortly after, and there was riots in, I believe, Detroit. I'm not sure if that's the right city, but I think it was. Again, that's not to condone what the people are doing necessarily in terms of property damage, or if you're doing some kind of violent act against an individual. But this all kind of came to a head when we had Kyle Rittenhouse, this kid who's not even from Kenosha, Wisconsin. He's not even from the state. Came over to Kenosha and was patrolling the streets with an AR. This kid's 17 years old. And, the facts of the situation there are a little bit cloudy, as it were. There's only video, basically, of the second shooting. And Kyle Rittenhouse has been charged, like he killed 2 people and seriously injured 1. And so the video is after the first killing. And so, yeah, it's like the people on the far right want to portray this as if Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense. I think that's questionable considering we don't know what led to that incident where he was like he was in the streets and someone had a skateboard or someone was going to hit him over the head. Like those people could have been going after him because he had already committed a crime. And so, I mean, it's also you kind of have to wonder too, if you're claiming self-defense and someone is coming after you with a skateboard. I mean, like, and you have an AR-15, like you're able to kill people with ease. So, way overkill. But even putting, his actions aside, like I'm saying, he's a minor, so, and he's, it looked like he was brought up from a young age with a gun. And it's not just the fact that he is brought up around guns. That's not necessarily the problem, but it's this idea that he's kind of like a freedom fighter, like he's defending America by doing this. So, like, putting him aside, because I mean he's a minor, and I think it's not to say like I think he has no responsibility for what he does just because he's a minor. But I'm saying this because the cops just were casually around this kid Honestly, like I've seen like multiple videos now of him on the streets, like going around, and I think there's video after and before the shootings. And regardless, I mean, if it's before, actually, it's almost even worse because the police could have prevented it by being like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And they would have quickly realized this kid's not from the area, so it's really a mess because the point is the police they can't be condoning stuff like this. Like they're going after the protesters and the rioters like hardcore. Like it doesn't matter if you're peaceful or not. I've seen videos now, countless videos of people doing nothing. Two instances I've seen now of veterans confronting the officers. They aren't doing anything bad. They're talking to them, and then they just completely freak out on them. So it has nothing to do with whether you're being peaceful or not. It has to do with you're out in the street demanding justice. Excuse me. You're rocking the boat essentially and trying to push for change to the established order and end systemic racism that benefits white supremacy, which is what our country is founded on. I mean, sorry to break it to you, but the cops that they have to be able to show more restraint. Like this is part of their job. It has nothing to do with even this particular situation we're in now. This is part of what their job is always supposed to be. They are supposed to, when people are acting erratic and violent, their job is to stay level-headed, to protect the public as much as possible, and like they're putting their life on the line. This is part of what the job is. So I think there's too much of this idea that cops can do anything they want to protect their own life, even if it's endangering other people's lives and killing other people sometimes when it's unnecessary, when people are not armed or in any way a threat, like with Jacob Blake. Shot the guy in the back 7 times. I mean, there was countless other ways that situation could have unfolded. It didn't have to go that way. So when it comes to my position on policing, like I may not be as far left as some. I think defunding the police case by case, you got to look at each individual location, because I bet a lot of times certain police forces might be underfunded, and that could probably lead to other problems. Like with Ferguson, they were trying to basically just constantly ticket African Americans. Like I mean, like they're more prone to be pulled over and ticketed, anyways. But they were basically like using ticketing as a way to bring in revenue. So case by case, I'm not necessarily like abolishing the police. Like if your individual community wants to do that, like in I think they did in Minneapolis, they abolished their police. And I'm assuming they're starting from scratch. I don't know what exactly is going to come after that. So, yeah, it's like, based on what the individual communities want, that's fine. But overall, it's like, you need to, it's a very difficult issue, policing, because I think the solutions they have to come from the community itself. Because it's the only way it gets really implemented. It's the only way that you have to hold everyone in your own community accountable, especially when it comes to police. You got to be, well informed about what's going on and know the inner workings of your local politics. Because if there's no pressure on them to change anything, then it's just not going to happen. So I think the change does have to come from within the local level, but at the same time, there has to be some semblance of a higher federal standard. There has to be just higher standards across the board, really, because it makes no sense that in order to be a lawyer, you have to go to 4 years, if not more, of school, and in order to be a cop, it takes like 6 months. So it just doesn't really make much sense to have a system like that. These are people that we trust with our lives. They protect us, supposedly, and a lot of times they just go over the top and kill people unnecessarily so. And so Joe Biden put out this ad condemning riots, and I bet a lot of people on the right, they're going to be saying, "Oh, it's too little, too late. You can't do that." Well, look, the question ultimately is, if Joe Biden is president, like, these anarchists in the street are not going to have any more power. It's a ridiculous assertion to be like, if the Democrats win, there's going to be just more chaos and violence in the street. I mean, we're seeing this under Trump, so it's a little bit of a tricky argument when it comes to this, because a lot of the Democrats are just trying to say, like, this is like Trump is causing this chaos. And I think he does share some of the blame, because he stokes these divisions. And when it comes to Kyle Rittenhouse now, he's saying he defends him. He's saying it was self-defense. Trump has to understand that, look, even if that was true, even if Kyle Rittenhouse was just fending off people that were, going after him for no reason, no provocation, the problem is that you're going to be encouraging more people, more young white men, to show up with guns. It basically sets the precedent that you can just show up and play real life COD. This is what I think it is, honestly. It's this fantasy that they're there on the front lines of the culture war, essentially. Like, they're trying to preserve their version of America, which to them basically just means constant police brutality, I guess. Because this is the thing. Here's a very important point. People always talk about the intentions when it comes to this Kyle Rittenhouse kid. It's like, oh, he's there to protect businesses. And mind you, again, this is not his community. It's not even the state that he lives in. So he's going there, and his intentions are he's going to defend the community, even if it's not his own, right? So if that's the case, if that's all that matters, essentially, is that, oh, he's there for a good cause, then why does that not apply to the protesters? Because the protesters are there to try and fix this police brutality problem. They're there to try and say this is not acceptable, and we're not going to just sit back while black men get gunned down, indiscriminately in the streets. So those intentions never matter, apparently. So, and I'm sorry, but again, even though I don't condone the rioting and the looting, I'm not going to conflate property damage and starting some fires to gunning down people. That's not as these problems are not as equally bad, okay? And I worry. It's the problem of priorities here, because the people in power right now, Trump and the far right, they refuse to condemn this stuff. I saw Ron Johnson. I think he's a senator for Wisconsin, and he appeared on CNN, and he just kept calling it a tragedy, like that these kids were killed by Kyle Rittenhouse. He kept saying it was a tragedy, but he wouldn't condemn it. And that might seem trivial, but you have to be able to say that there's problems within your own party. So it's like, if the Republicans want to turn around and be like, oh, the Democrats have to own up to Antifa, even though they have like nothing to do with each other. Antifa, the people in the streets, the anarchists, like, a lot of them don't even like Biden. They're not going to go vote for Biden. So it's not as if these people are Democrats necessarily, but that's the kind of framing of the far right. The people on the right have to acknowledge the problem. That is, you're basically encouraging vigilantism. This is what it's come to now. And because they believe, they make it look like the local authorities have nothing, that there's like nothing that they can do. They're asking Trump, or I think, I don't know if it was Trump who offered to send federal officers, or who asked who, but they turned it down initially, the mayor and the governor of Wisconsin, and then I think eventually they came around and said, we'll take the federal officers. But the thing is this: throwing more manpower, throwing more federal officers at this problem is not going to help. It might, in a short-term sense. I mean, it's going to be a very brutal way of going about this. First of all, I can sympathize with the idea that you want to stop chaos, that you want to stop, rioting and looting in the streets. I agree that that shouldn't happen. But the problem is, people don't exactly acknowledge that a lot of times the police actually instigate these things. The incident where the Navy veteran that I saw recently, he confronted federal officers in Portland. He was saying how the protest was peaceful. It was like in two square blocks, and then the federal officers came out of the courthouse and just started barricading people, pushing them out into the streets and deploying tear gas and stuff. So they try and disperse the crowd, but that leads to chaos. So the issue is not that there's not enough manpower, that there's not enough stormtroopers in the street being brutal to people, because these are just scare tactics. That they don't want you to be out there, so they're going to be as brutal as possible. But the thing is, you're never going to stop people from going out in the streets that way. It just won't happen, because people recognize the moment that we're in, the dangerousness of these precedents that are being set up here, and I think there's a kind of a nihilistic streak going on where people feel like there's no hope, there's no other way to achieve change than to do it this way. This is Dr. Martin Luther King said a riot is the language of the unheard, and so basically what I'm saying is in order to stop this chaos, you have to actually address systemic racism. You have to actually do policies that will try and bring about some sort of change. And it's not easy. I understand that. Trump did the First Step Act, and that's what they want to latch on to as if he's some civil rights hero right now. The right does, at least. It's literally a first step. So it's if I'm going to acknowledge that there's good things in there, I don't know enough about that legislation, to be honest with you. I know that a lot of people have been, their sentences have been commuted and such, but the point is, it's not enough. Trump has to be doing a lot more in order to try and stop this chaos. And I know he'll never go that far. He'll never go as far as what the left wants. And probably Biden will never go as far as what the left wants either, which is why I think these protests should continue, even if Biden wins. We have to keep protesting until we achieve change, because the Democrats are just not going to, they're not going to just listen to the left magically and legalize marijuana, as one example. Kamala Harris apparently says she's for that. Well, Joe Biden isn't. They couldn't even adopt it into the DNC platform. So we got to be pushing the Democrats as well, is what I'm saying. And then there was a Trump caravan heading to Portland. Just a long stream of trucks with the Trump flags, just long, as far as the eye could see down the highway. And they're going to Portland, I guess, under the guise of they're going to defend the small businesses or something like. But the thing is this, like Trump said in an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News, she asked him, "Are you encouraging your supporters to go out basically and defend so and so?" And he's saying, "No, you got to leave it to the local authorities." And Trump, to his credit, I mean, that was the right response in a way. It's probably not enough, because he has to actually condemn stuff like with Kyle Rittenhouse, and he didn't do that. He did the opposite of that. He basically praised it. But in this instance, his own supporters are not listening to Trump, because they they feel like, I guess, the police are ineffectual. They feel like there's nothing they can do to handle this situation, so they're going over there to play, cops and robbers. I don't know how you characterize it, but it's looking a lot like Preamble to Second Civil War. I mean, I know that sounds hyperbolic to some people, but especially after the election, almost no matter who wins, it's not looking very good. In terms of the tensions, in terms of the divide in the culture, the cultural war. It is really, because it is people on the right who feel like their version of the country is under attack, and they really are convinced, I guess, that Biden is like a puppet of the far left or something. Like, they're going with this line of attack where there was this ridiculous NRA ad, and it's, I mean, like, it's describes like a single mother. I don't know if it's a single mother of like 2 kids and works 2 jobs, and then there's this burglar coming after her. She goes to her car, goes into the glove box, and then there's a gun there, and then disappears. Like, they're trying to say, like, your rights are going to be taken away, and then you're not going to be able to defend yourself. Like, it's really the most caricature, absurd idea I can think of. Just first of all, as if these anarchists are going after like single mothers who work 2 jobs or something. Like, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Biden has said he might be in favor of banning assault weapons, but I don't think he's gonna keep you from purchasing a pistol and having a carry permit, or I don't know if it's carry permit, I think it's called. It's just hyperbolic from their part, really, because they're making it look like if Biden wins, there's just going to be chaos, and like the suburbs are going to be overrun with anarchists. But again, Biden just came out and condemned this stuff. He even said like months ago, I think this was when the George Floyd shooting happened. Biden said it would be better if cops were trained to shoot people in the leg as opposed to the heart. It's like, I can't really argue with that, I guess. It's like, it's better to be shot in the leg than the heart. I follow that, but I'm not really sure this is, a good solution to this problem of systemic racism there. Sorry, but so to act like this is like the Antifa candidate, Biden, like, that's absurd. And I'm pretty sure only people on the far right would buy that. The DNC was basically all geared towards moderate suburbanites, and so basically trying to show that he's not, this far left caricature of that Trump paints him to be. I don't know how much they needed to convince people of that. I mean, maybe I'm just speaking because like I followed this stuff, and I know Biden wrote the crime bill as one example. He's not soft on crime, so maybe they felt like they needed to educate people in that sense. But again, like, in terms of energizing people to come vote, convincing non-voters to come out and vote, it's just that DNC did nothing in terms of that. One other quick thing. Trump urges people to vote twice. Basically kind of poking fun. I feel like this was a very troll move for Trump, and he doesn't even realize that he advocated for something that's illegal. You can't vote twice in the election. So he's basically saying, like, oh, they vote by mail and then show up to vote again. And if the system is that good, then it'll catch it. Well, okay. You're basically creating more backlog to the system. I mean, like, as far as I am aware, if you attempt to vote twice, like, that's illegal. I don't know what punishment comes with that. I think some people have gone to jail for it, though. But I don't know exactly how long the process takes, but eventually they get around to realizing that there were 2 votes cast in your name. They're very good at catching stuff like this, like in fraud, as one example, because they always bring up fraud as like why we can't do mail-in ballots. They catch fraud, a lot of the time. and the other part of it is like on a mass scale, like this, like there's no way to influence an election that way. It's logistically impossible to do that. So there's a lot of fear mongering in terms of that, but it's like it just is crazy to me that this is the law and order candidate, the president, actually advocating for something that is illegal, for voting twice and basically just creating more chaos. Legalizing marijuana, certain states are putting out ballot initiatives for the election. I'm not sure which states now, but Trump is worried that it'll hurt his chances. And, like, if he's worried about that, then he should just come out in favor of that, right? It seems simple enough. It might convince some people to go along with him if he's backing more populist ideas. Excuse me, sorry. But the DNC, like I said, they can't even adopt that into their own platform. Or Medicare for All. These are very simple progressive ideas that should be part of the platform, and not just part of the platform. They need to be pushed relentlessly by Biden and Harris. This is what I say. Like the platform on the website doesn't matter because hardly anyone's going to read that anyways. Or even understand all the nuances, because like that thing is so dense when you look at all the stuff that they have there. It's just really technocratic nonsense. But even, I'm really saying right now, if they were basically nominally for Medicare for All and legalizing marijuana, but they didn't push for these things relentlessly and they didn't push for them in a way that's convincing, it's not going to do any good then. You have to show people how it benefits them. You have to show people like why our system now is not equal in a lot of ways. You have to be able to reach people and show how it improves their material needs, basically. And so you don't get that from just reading a platform on a website. You have to have a leader push for these things in a way that inspires people. And again, I don't know, in terms of the stakes of this election, people might be making a different assessment. It's just like they don't want Trump in there. He's incompetent, so they just want to get Biden in there. It could be the case that is more or less what's motivating people to go vote. But I'm not okay with just hinging it on that. Like, the Democrats need to be doing everything in their power to invigorate the young vote. And I'm just not seeing it. It's like there's very simple steps that they could take. But instead, they want to do, corny stuff. Like, they made signs and stuff on Animal Crossing. Like, this is their Pokemon Go to the polls moment, Biden and Harris. Like, they're not going to reach out to young people by just being folksy and be like, oh, I'm on your side. No, you've got to fight for the policy. And I'm not content to just be like, oh, we got to accept this like shitty version of the Democratic Party. No, they need to do their work. They need to invigorate people and inspire people, like I'm saying. Because, look, at the end of the day, this is what wins. You have to get as much people out to vote as possible. There's a huge non-voter population in this country, so it would help immensely if you could actually inspire people and not give them platitudes and cliches and just nothing. I mean, like, they're really running this election on the anti-Trump sentiment. They want to make it a referendum on Trump, and they're just trying to skate by with that and basically just do these cliches like restoring the soul of America. Like, it doesn't mean anything because that's going to mean so many different things to different people, even within the left. And it's like it really seems to me like they're trying to go after like the moderate suburban voters. Um, it seems crazy to me to think a lot of those people would be undecided. But I suppose it's possible. There might be some people that voted for Trump and maybe they're not too crazy on how he's been governing. Um, but again, my rebuttal to that, if you want to say we have to go after the the moderate suburbanites, that's fine if you want to do that, but adopt some very modestly progressive policies because I don't think that that's going to take away from that voter population, like older white suburban voters. Because look, if they really were like so turned off by Biden that they won't vote for him if he backs Medicare for all, that would be like the most hypocritical thing ever. Because in 2016, like they scolded Bernie voters for not being like that enthusiastic about Hillary. Because like the mass, I'm sorry, I can't stop today. The vast majority of Bernie voters went out and voted for Hillary. It's because it wasn't like rah enthusiastic enough, apparently. But again, it's like it's that purity test argument. They're saying like, oh well, Hillary wasn't good enough for you, so you didn't show up in like massive droves. Even though we did, we actually like the vast majority of us did. But it's just ridiculous to me. So I want to just cover what's going on at the DNC. It's just largely what you would expect: platitudes and cliches, playing heavily to moderate voters, and you know, a big contradiction from the Republicans, real quick, with their RNC. At least with Rand Paul, I mean, like he went after Biden for the crime bill, but like the implication is like he's also soft on crime. So you can't have it both ways. You know, like if you're trying to make the point that Biden is gonna just lead to more chaos in the streets and the anarchists are gonna, overrun the suburbs, like he wrote the crime bill, and so like you can't criticize him for both things, and that's what Rand Paul was essentially doing. But back to the DNC, Obama's disingenuous pitch to young people, like he was saying, like we can be a part of the process, and at the same time, like he was manipulating the whole primary, basically, especially like the day before Super Tuesday, because there were a lot of phone calls going back and forth, I'm sure, behind the scenes, and then all of a sudden Pete Buttigieg and Klobuchar drop out, and Warren stays in conveniently, right? That didn't help Bernie. So there's this massive coordination to keep things the way they are in terms of the establishment, and then Obama's like, oh, you could be a part of the process. You can, like, if that's true, first of all, then why is there no Medicare for all on the platform? Why is legalizing marijuana not on the platform? Why is tuition-free public college not on the platform? Why is ending the wars not on the platform? And yeah, if you look at the website, it'll say the majority of troops will be coming home, but I don't think people believe that. Like you've got to run on it's kind of a marketing thing, I think. Like you have to make your ideas that you're running on simple and easy to comprehend, and not this wonkiness where people will have to be like, oh well, I qualify for this, I qualify for that. Like it's too technocratic, is my point. It's too wonky for people to just be like, oh, it's this. Like healthcare for all. That's an easy concept for people to grasp. So it's just not looking good in terms of the Democrats. I mean, like the polls show, he's actually like Biden has had a drop off in terms of minority support. Now, it's just one poll. I know it was recent, but if the enthusiasm is not up for Biden, then it could spell disaster. I think it's still basically a coin toss. Because, look, it's almost too late at this point, I feel like. It's like 60 days or so before the election. Biden, he could come out for Medicare for All today, but I don't know if people are going to believe him. It's like this is so too little too late. So it's all, I feel like there's not much that can really change the shape of the race except for the debates. AOC's controversy in terms of the DNC, she had 60 seconds to speak. That was a big deal. Everyone was saying, she's extremely popular, and they're only allowing her this small window to speak. And she didn't mention Biden, and she nominated Bernie. It was a procedural move. She endorsed Biden before, so she was staying true to her principles within those kind of procedural grounds. I call it a meaningless gesture just because, like, she knows that Bernie cannot be the nominee. She knew that, making that little 60-second speech of hers. She did that in order to basically stay true to her principles and to show a lot of the younger people that support her that she's not just going to bend to whatever the institution wants. They want her to basically stick to the script and be like, rah, rah, Biden, right? But she's not going to do that. She understands that she has more value if she's basically more honest about what she wants. And I mean, like, it's plain as day. Bernie and AOC, their policies, their ideas, that they share more in common together than they do with Biden. So it just, like, that was her role, was to basically tell the young people, like, I'm with you, like, I understand where you're at. But the media, they can't let her go for that, like, because she's not sycophantic enough for Biden. And Chris Cuomo made a big deal about it. Like, it's just too much. I can't do it anymore. I'm losing a lot of hope because after like 4 years of Trump now, the Democrats have done really nothing to basically show that they learned anything from 2016. I mean, like, this is the exact same scenario that we're in. With, like, minor differences, but in terms of, like, the campaigning style and the tactics, it's just very bare minimum stuff, and they're trying to make it a referendum on Trump. Excuse me. Like, I get that, sentiments are probably different now. People see Trump's incompetence in a lot of ways, but again, you've got to instill hope in people. You've got to show people that your vote is going to mean something, and that it's not just, putting in another technocrat guy who's not going to really care about your needs in the end. Because we all know how this works. It's like Biden is he's not populist hardly at all. I mean, like, his most progressive policy is raising the minimum wage. So it's like they can't even be progressive now when it's easy. When they hold the reins of power, they're not going to push for these progressive ideas. We have to push them tooth and nail. And so it really frustrates me that people don't understand the situation that the left's in, because it's just like we feel like there's no hope either way, because we're just going to have to keep doing these protests, this pressuring to even get a fraction of what we want. That's what the reality is, unfortunately, is that in order to get even an inkling of what we want, we have to put enormous pressure on the Democrats, because once they get into office, I already know their big thing that they're going to tell us is we have to clean up the Republicans' mess. We have to address the debt and the deficit because it's at record levels right now. They're not going to want to listen to our demands, and that's why this idea of like the harm reduction, um, it's just not a very convincing argument in terms of getting people out there to vote. It's like I understand how it logically makes sense. You want to have someone in power that's more responsive to the left's needs. I get that. But it's like if I'm going to go out and canvass for Biden, there's no argument that's going to help me. I'm not equipped to actually convince people. Like I talked to a lot of different people about politics, from a pretty varied of political ideology, and like it's like really I just can't even come up with an analogy of like trying to show people like I wish I can convince you to vote for Biden because like I agree that like we have to kind of do voting strategically. However, it's just like in terms of convincing people, I just don't see how that's possible right now. Like you need to root it in the material well-being, of people and how their policies will improve that. That's the only way you can inspire people to come out and vote for you, is to show how it is you're going to bring about economic justice, racial justice, environmental justice. And the problem is, like, here's really another problem that pisses me off. Like, the Democrats, they can't even give a policy argument from their neoliberal perspective. I think they know that, like, those ideas are not popular. That's why they don't do that. But there's, like, no policy argument to be had at all. It's all that they're just more competent than Trump. And that's it. They're going to restore the soul of America, like I said, all these like platitudes and cliches. And you can see in the DNC how it's like this is like they believe in this like traditional America because like they have people there that were like in the RNC like in the 80s, and they had John Kasich there. So it's like they maybe got a little better at branding the return to normalcy idea. They dressed it up to make it sound a little bit more friendly, but it's just not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough to get the droves of people out there to vote that we need. And I don't know. It's possible Biden can win this by doing the bare minimum. I just think that's a risky move. Because Trump, I think he understands that he can't really get more votes. He has to try and retain as much of his support as possible, and it's already kind of fallen apart to begin with. Though there was a poll that just came out recently that like basically like Republicans, like when they take polls on over the phone, they're more likely to lie about their political beliefs, which kind of implies that there's more Republican support than the polls might indicate. But like again, like it's going to come down to how Biden underperforms. He has to get as much people out there as possible, and it's not an issue of raising money. And to be honest, I don't think it's an issue of necessarily canvassing and phone banking and that kind of thing, because the only thing that convinces people is actual policy. Like you can go ahead and say Biden is more competent than Trump. And by the way, I mean, like, his mental state, I don't really know. Like, I obviously don't like what Trump does in terms of policy, but in terms of, like, their mental competency, it's like, is it really that different between Biden and Trump? I really don't know that. Like, it's just a really terrible situation that we're in, honestly, because it should not be a coin toss. Is the point? Is like in this day and age where we have Trump, who is a uniquely unpopular, incompetent president, the Democrats shouldn't have to be working this hard to convince people like why they should vote for them. It should be clear as day. But it's not clear as day because there's just hardly like any policy differences. But Biden just came out and said he's not in favor of banning fracking. So that's not, you're not going to achieve environmental justice that way. You're not going to inspire young people to come out and vote if they feel like the world's going to basically burn anyways. So even like putting the moral and principled side of it aside, it's good strategy to try and reach the young people on these policy needs that they're pushing for and that they're out there in the streets for right now. So what can the left do going forward? I think we should be donating to progressive candidates. I just put 3 names down here. There's obviously a lot more people that we could donate our time and money to. Ed Markey just won his primary versus Joe Kennedy. Cori Bush, she won her primary in Missouri, I believe it was. And then Jamal Bowman he won his primary as well in New York. So those are just 3 names right there of pretty progressive candidates that we should try and get behind. And I don't think we should call like any race a safe race necessarily anymore. Even though it might look like that, like we have to be as unified as possible. Because especially the Democratic, like the more centrist, moderate type people, like they're going to have a lot of money backing them. So we're at a disadvantage. We are. So we have to make up for that. And it's unfortunate that that's the way it is. Excuse me, sorry. So other things that we can do, donate to political causes that basically help build coalitions on important policy issues, like Medicare for All. It's like I said before, like I don't think donating to Biden is that particularly helpful. The more important thing is that we can get more people on board with fighting for progressive policies like Medicare for All. Like it's great that Medicare for All has something like 70% support among the American people, but we should be getting that number even higher, I think, because if you get it to like 90% or something like that, in that scenario, maybe it'll be more likely to be passed, and the Democrats will just be like, like this is too much of a liability now. We can't do this. We can't hold out on this issue. So I think that's important. Just basically trying to spread the popularity of progressive issues across the country and get more people involved in trying to implement those changes. But basically, like strengthening the resolve that the left around the country has. It doesn't have to be behind a candidate. It's like it's good to go out and vote strategically. Like I said, like that's fine. But we all have to kind of be on the same page in terms of the policy, and we have to be more educated and informed about how we can push these policies. Because like obviously the centrists are going to have their talking points to go after us and say like, well, we can't do this. We have to push back as much as we can and put pressure on people by protesting. So maybe join DSA as one example, like to try and show that the shift in this country is going to happen. It's whether the centrists are going to go along with it or they're going to fall behind and become the ways of the past.